Right, well, hello and good morning everyone to the opening session of this year's summit, a festival of ideas. My name is Jeremy Porteous. I'm the founder of the Housing Learning and Improvement Network, or HousingLIN for short, and our small team has pulled together a fabulous week-long programme of online events with over 40 speakers sharing their ideas, knowledge and expertise to help inform and improve your sector learning. Indeed, a record 500 people have signed up to join, and we anticipate this will attract at least 2,000 views right across the week, far more than if we had held this summit in person. This is also double the numbers from last year, when we had no other choice but to switch our annual conference to online as a result of this pandemic. Going digital and using our popular happy hour platform has certainly meant that we've been able to extend our reach. This has been further amplified by social media, and please do tweet using the hashtags or the Twitter handle shown on this slide. This year's summit takes place during Happy Awareness Week and champions best practice in housing and care for an ageing population. It's also the 10th anniversary of the HousingLIN, independent of government. Formerly responsible for the Department of Health's Extra Care Housing Capital Programme, and using a network approach to support policy implementation, over the last 10 years we've continued to be at the forefront of knowledge transfer to influence strategic thinking and bring together operational delivery to inform specialist and supported housing and technology-enabled care. Themes at the heart of the Adult Social Care White Paper last week, and which will be explored further today. But before we commence the opening session, a couple of other things. First of all, this summit would not be possible without the generous support of all our headline and associate sponsors listed on this slide. I'd like to personally thank them all for all their continued support, not just for this week, but throughout the year, as all the sponsorship enables us to sustain our programme and keep running activities for free. Secondly, I'd now like to hand over to Sally, our Communications Marketing Events Officer, so that she can go through the logistics about this session and our Zoom platform. So, Sally, over to you.
Thanks, Jeremy. So yeah, if you are using subtitles today, you can click on live transcript and show subtitles at the bottom of your screen. We do encourage you to ask your questions and leave them in the Q&A box, and you're free to upvote each other's questions or leave comments on other delegates' questions. So you can also use the chat box to talk to each other, make comments or share resources during today's session, or if you want to do this after today's session, you can do that you can use the questions and comments function on the summit's webpage. If you do experience any technical problems today, please do use the chat box and send me a direct message and I'll help you the best that I can. And please do complete the short survey at the end of this session. And just a quick reminder that this event is being recorded. Back to you, Jeremy.
Thanks, that's really helpful. And so if people are familiar with our Happy Hour platform, it's the same programme and the same platform, so hopefully you'll be aware of that. So turning to this session, can I take this opportunity to thank headline sponsor Lovell Later Living and the UKRI for your support. The session is all about delivering homes and communities fit for the future. And I'm really delighted to introduce a long-term friend of the LIN, Paula Broadbent, Managing Director of Lovell Later Living, who's going to chair it and who in turn will introduce the programme and the excellent cast of speakers. Paula, over to you.
Thank you, Jeremy, and good morning to everybody. I hope everybody is well, and it would be great for us to all be in person like we used to do for this summit, not least because it's the 10th anniversary. So personally, I'm feeling a little bit robbed, Jeremy, I've got to say, because I was really looking forward to the 10th anniversary party. But anyway, we will make up for it, as we keep saying. So this morning's session, opening the summit, we sort of thought a lot. We wanted to open the sort of proceedings, and it's only seemed apt that we needed to think about the environment in which we live in. We needed to think about very carefully how are we going to move things forward to create places that ultimately are encapsulating what we know has become even more important out of the pandemic, and that's about sense of place, sense of community, and that well-being in your own home as well as in the surroundings that you're in. So we've got some fantastic speakers with us today who are really going to bring to the fore the research and innovation and collaboration that they've been involved in to help us sort of think about and sort of ask ourselves some questions about how can we drive better design of both products and services for the future. You know, how can we use the evidence of social value and the strength of partnerships to shape investment for future-proof communities? And so, you know, they're all really key questions that come up, and, you know, over the last decade of the HousingLIN, not least, you know, I myself have stood up on the platform and talked about many of these agendas throughout my career, you know, that started in residential care and moved through a number of the leading housing associations across the country in driving forward excellence in supported housing, and not least being around sort of the evolution of extra care, which ultimately, you know, I understand, you know, we may be having a new title for that on the horizon, thanks to ARCO now looking at the integrated retirement community title. But again, these are all just titles, and what we've got to bring ourselves back to is the sense of place. You know, that's why the role that I'm in now at Lovell, as the managing director of Lovell Later Living, is something that's really exciting to me, because I'm part of an organisation and leading a business who we intend to make an awful lot of difference across the spectrum of later living. So the speaker's order today is I will be introducing in turn. Speaker number one is Sue Carthare, and Sue is a long-standing friend of mine and very respected HousingLIN lead for Yorkshire and Humber, as well as across the sector. Sue is Chief Executive of Harrogate Neighbours Housing Association organisation, who I've worked with the Commissioner's hat on, as well as a developer. But Sue is going to share with you today the journey of Harrogate Neighbours, which really sort of demonstrates to you the uniqueness of into that creating a community and having a focus in particular around nutrition and hydration. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Sue before then, who will be closely followed by Toby Lloyd, who's a fellow at Creative Streets Foundation, and George McGuinness of it was the Challenge Director of Healthy Ageing UK Research and Innovation. The final speaker will be Michael Chang, who's Programme Manager of Planning and Health, which is the Healthy Places and Office of Health Improvement. And in the question and answer session, we will be joined then by a special guest of Matt Leach, who's CEO from Local Trust. So as you can see, it's quite a packed session this morning. I'm going to jump straight into Sue before we then move into Toby. Toby's session, I'm going to just explain a little bit more in detail about Toby. So over to you, Sue.
Thank you very much, Paula, and thank you very much for the introduction. It's absolutely delightful to be here this morning, and like Paula, it's a shame we all can't be in person, but I think we've all got used to doing these Zoom events now. I just want to take you on a little bit of a journey this morning, and I want to explain to you the journey that Harrogate Neighbours has been on, and also me personally over the last 10+ years. Harrogate Neighbours was set up by the churches here in Harrogate some 50+ years ago to provide services for the elderly and really for the needy. As I'm sure you can all imagine, 50 years ago, there weren't a huge amount of people that needed our services. But over the years, things have changed and demands on our services have changed. We have two sites. We have a care home that operates dementia care, and we have the Cuttings, which is the journey I'm going to tell you about. We also operate a Meals on Wheels service into the community, very successful Meals on Wheels service now. And we also operate a domiciliary care agency where we provide care services to the people that live in our sites, but also into the community. So some 10 years ago, I started my journey with extra care and housing, and we had a site that was very popular, Greenfield Court, a very old sheltered housing style building, maintained full capacity, had a little bit of a communal area, had a small kitchen, and we'd joyed along really, really well. But the building, as we became more needy with our clients, the building started to creak and groan as it just couldn't cope with the demands on the building. Working in collaboration with North Yorkshire County Council, which has been really our key, we were able to work with them and decide that we needed to replace the site with another. And for those of you who maybe aren't familiar with Harrogate, there isn't a huge amount of spare land lying around for you to build and develop on. And as we're a not-for-profit charity, obviously we're limited with funds on being able to do that too. So we had to think about how could we go, where could we go, what could we do? And this is where the partnership with North Yorkshire County Council was absolutely key. They identified some land that really they needed to get rid of. It wasn't the best site in the world, but you know, sometimes you can't be choosy if you're going to be given something. And we then started the long journey on the building of a new site. But of course, what was key for us was what was the need, what was the demand. So we engaged with a local organisation who helped us look at the demographics, look at the community, what was required, were we going to be going on a journey where we would potentially fail? Obviously, that was absolutely key, that we were going to be successful. The other key journey for us was taking our clients, our tenants, residents with us. It's very hard, isn't it, when you want to tell 55 people that we're going to pick you up and move you somewhere else in Harrogate that you don't really know and you're very comfortable where you are. So it was really key that we took those people on that journey with us. So, as I say, we worked really hard with the local authority, the needs of the community, and looking at what we needed going forward. And the design was, as far as I was concerned, was absolutely critical. We were going from a very old building to potentially a very modern building, but we wanted to create some good space, some nice space, some light. So we looked at all the things that we needed to achieve. So we engaged with an architect, and we engaged with a design and build company who assisted us on that journey. I also spent many months travelling the country, looking at new schemes, old schemes, schemes that were in construction, and trying to understand. My background is care. I've not done housing to the extent that I have done now. So I was on a huge learning curve myself. And when I realised that there are some amazing people out there who are very willing to share their aspirations, their ideas, what they learned, what they could have done better. So we brought all that back, and we then drew up the cuttings where we are today. It was also very key to engage with the local community. If you're going to build something in a local community, you need them on board with you. And of course, because we provide our hot meal service, which was provided at Greenfield Court, I needed to ensure that we could do the same here at the cuttings. And our aspiration was to build this amazing commercial kitchen. So I needed to fund for that as well. And I needed the community to support us with it. It was also really important that our communal areas, our services, were going to be successful. As we all know, when you build extra care, isn't just about the apartments, but it's also about the communal areas that you add on, and it's how you then engage the community to visit those communal areas. And where we are at the cuttings, it's at the end of a street. It's at the very end of a street, so no passing traffic. So what we needed to do was create an area where we knew that we were going to have people popping in to see us and knocking on our door and coming in for coffee. So we designed a 55-bed scheme, and we looked at, because we were coming from the old style bed sits, we felt that these were really successful. So we decided we were going to create some studio apartments. We worked with HousingLIN to make sure we tick the box for the funding, and we created 10 studio apartments, and then we also created the traditional 1 and 2 bedroom apartments. Interestingly, the 10 studios that we created have been so successful that I wish I had 10 more, really. But we've also future-proofed them so that if we ever get to the stage where people don't want studios, then we can put them back to 1 bedrooms. Our communal services, as I said, were absolutely key. We needed a restaurant stroke cafe. We wanted a wellbeing suite so that you could have people come along to have their nails, not the traditional hairdressing salon, but something a little bit different, something a little bit more quirky. So somewhere where you could come along and have a wellbeing day, whether it be your nails, your feet, your hair. And the other key thing for us was we wanted a spa bath. I'd seen so many assisted bathrooms that were just quite bland and not very enticing, so we wanted a spa bath, and then a small quiet lounge for the gents to play pool, and other small coffee mornings and other events. Because of where we are and the site we had, it was a challenge because the site's very long, so we had to create a building that was long and thin. Not the ideal, as we all know, for extra care. But again, with marvellous input from the architects and design and build company, we were able to create a building that works, and also to have tremendous outdoor space. Outdoor space, as I'm sure we all agree, is absolutely key for people. And obviously, during the last 18 months, I don't know what we would have done with our outside space. We've been able to have our allotment up and running, and has been great for people to come out to. We've also I was persuaded by my staff that we should have chickens. So we also have our own chickens now, and we're producing our own eggs. So what more could you ask for? It was also important to engage with our local neighbours, and we have the local Harrogate Railway Football Club, which has been absolutely key in our success. Not only do they help us with the build, because we use their grounds to provide all the services for the build company, but also the relationship we have developed with them has been absolutely amazing. Not only now do we support their match days with our catering, and they use some of our car park, but we use their car park, we use their facilities, and it is a fantastic relationship. And although I think they were a bit daunted when we said we were going to build here, certainly the partnership has worked really, really well. Our kitchens, our commercial kitchen was key because we operate Harrogate and Ripon Food Angels. We are delivering about 150 hot meals a day into the community. So our kitchen was really important to us. It's a commercial kitchen and it runs like a commercial kitchen, but we also use it for all sorts of other activities. We created the baking station during COVID, so we were able to deliver afternoon tea boxes to the community, and also macaroons, homemade macaroons. And we've also held, as we've come out of lockdown, some activities for the residents because it's such a fabulous space. So we've done cake decorating, biscuit making, and the list is endless. We also created a meeting room at the cuttings because we felt that we needed to have an area where we could engage with the community and also help us with our income. And that's worked really, really well. And we've partnered with the local NHS, the local hospital, CCG, and local authorities. And they come and they use our meeting room. And it's a lovely way of us getting people into the building, but it's also a lovely way of us showcasing what we do. It's been quite an amazing journey for us from where we were as a small housing association, and we are still a relatively small housing association when I look at some of my colleagues that are with us today, but we have learned to be innovative and creative on how we deliver our services, and we have learned how that with spaces you can do the most amazing things. When we first built the cuttings, we had what I could probably basically say is like an open plan area. So the open plan area, as you come in the main door, is your restaurant, cafe, and your lounge. And we were a bit nervous because we were sort of, you know, some of the traditional schemes are segregated, the rooms are separate, doors and everything. But actual fact, it's worked really, really well. And it enables us to have big events as well as small events. But as you walk in the main doors, for those people who've been here, I think will agree that it has a real feel-good factor. One of the other things that we did on this site, which was really important to us, was to keep the old site is what was the old station. And I desperately, as Paul will remember, wanted to keep the old station building, but it just wasn't meant to be. It just wouldn't work. So we have created the whole of the ground floor around the station, the local Starbeck station. So hence why we're called the Cuttings. That's obviously where we've got our name from. And then the whole of the ground is all about the railway. It's all about the local railway. And we've got the most amazing, huge floor-to-ceiling graphics. We've created the waiting room where you can come in and you can go into what would have been an old-fashioned style waiting room in the 1950s, even down to the sounds, which is great. And then the whole of the ground floor, as I say, is dedicated to the station. So you can walk down our ground floor and see memorabilia, excuse me, of the station. Our restaurant is called the Dining Car. So you come down to the dining car, and again, we've got lots of graphics around the dining car of a traditional train. And you can sit outside in the summer when it's lovely and warm and watch the trains going backwards and forwards from York to Leeds. And when we moved our residents from Greenfield Court to here, they were had the choice to have their preference. Which side did they want to be? The side of the railway or the side of the football ground? And as I can show you, can imagine, there was quite some interesting discussions as to which side they wanted to be. We've got a fabulous view of the football pitch, and on match days you can see some of our gentlemen up on the top floor having a bird's eye view of the site. And the residents now spend lots of time waving to people on the trains as they go past. So it was a win-win. It worked for us because we took our residents on the journey. The journey was being part of it from day one, being part of everything that we've aspired to be, what we've chosen to do, down to choosing carpet colours, wall tiles, kitchens. And they were excited about being on this journey, the move from where we were to downtown Starbeck. They have loved the fact that they were involved in the whole process, and that was key to us. That it wasn't just about getting the staff involved, it was about getting our clients involved. And I think for us, the first day they moved into this site was the most amazing time for us. A huge success story for us as an organisation, excuse me, but for us in the sector. And I'm very proud of what we've achieved, and we have become the go-to person for other organisations. We've held many sessions here where other organisations have come and had a look about what we've achieved. I can honestly say that there are one or two things that we probably would not do again, and we could have done better. But I think that's with anything that you build, there's always something else that you can do better. But what we've achieved and how we've become the go-to place for the sector now is something to be very proud of, whether it's building a scheme or whether it's building a commercial kitchen so that you can diversify and do things a bit differently. Because, you know, at the end of the day, all these things that we do now generate more funds for us and make us successful. And you know, I can honestly say that we are a very successful organisation with a very, very bright future. And, you know, we've got aspirations to do more working with the local authorities as we go forward. So I hope that you have enjoyed my journey, and I hope you've enjoyed listening to what we've achieved. And, you know, as Jeremy and Paul will know, I'm more than happy at any time to talk to people, to show what we do. And thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you, Sue. Thank you very much, as always, in sharing what has been an amazing journey, I know, for yourself, for your staff, but not least for your residents who, you know, I think as you've finished your journey off there, it finished off with the people who it mattered most to at the time, and how you involved them in every step of the way, from planning what was going to be happening to the choices throughout that move, and they continue to be involved in the future. and all the changes that are continuing to happen going forward. So there'll be lots of opportunities throughout the question and answer session for any questions that you have for Sue, but please do use the chat side if you want to register those questions now while they're fresh in your mind, then please do so. So I'd like to move on to our second speaker now, which is Toby Lloyd. And as I say, Toby previously was a special advisor to number 10 to our previous Prime Minister, Theresa May. And Toby was an advisor on housing and local government. So he brings that wealth of sort of experience, not least in the advisory, but that insider of number 10. So we'll see any questions that come up on that and question and answers. But ultimately, Toby is going to share with you today the No Place Left Behind. Toby was chair of the Commission into Prosperity and Community Place Shaping that was set up by the Create Streets Foundation. And Toby's going to share with you how exploring the potential for community empowerment and placemaking can improve the lives of neighbourhoods. So without any further ado, Toby, over to you.
Thank you, Paula, and yeah, thank you to HousingLIN for hosting this. Yeah, I'm going to give you a very quick recap of the No Place Left Behind Commission. I do have some slides, so I will share those with you all now. Assuming I can make this work. This was a commission that was set up by the Create Streets Foundation to look into the issues of prosperity and community placemaking, and particularly the plight of left behind places. This was supposed to be a year-long project. Obviously, like everything else over the last year, it got rather disrupted by the pandemic. The big problem for us was this was supposed to be a project where we assembled a fantastic kind of multidisciplinary, diverse team of commissioners to go around the country visiting inspiring projects and learning about communities and meeting people, and of course found that none of us could go anywhere or meet anyone, and we had to do it all via Zoom. So it was and it took rather longer than anticipated. So you know, we've all had a bit of a year like this, but we did at least manage to assemble a fantastic and diverse panel of experts, including Matt, who will be joining us later, and we've had some fantastic support from Local Trust, Power to Change, and Place Shapers, and various others as well. But really, what we're trying to look at here was the question of what of left behind places and what can be done to improve them. The Create Streets Foundation has done a lot of work on the importance of place quality. It tends to be focused, it's been largely focused on new development, which tends to be focused on places with where development values are high. That's where the market wants to build, and so that's where most Create Streets effort has been. This commission was specifically to think about places where actually development values are not very high, where there isn't a huge market pressure necessarily to build more, and there isn't necessarily a lot of money going around. So the first question is, therefore, what do we mean by left behind places? There's various different sources of data here, and apologies if the dog's going getting grumpy behind me. It's that time of year where there's an awful lot of deliveries going on. He doesn't like it. So there's an awful lot of different sources you can use to define being left behind. Index of multiple deprivation is an obvious source. The Gartner Institute have their own prosperity index. There's various other attempts to kind of capture this sense of what left behind means. Our preferred one is actually Matt's organisation's sponsored research by Oxy, the Community Needs Index. That's a composite index which captures a whole range of different things about local places themselves. I think it's important to note how it is different from deprivation. There's a clear relationship between deprivation, between material poverty and being left behind, but they are not quite the same thing. And the best illustration of this is just this slight technical graph here, which shows the relationship between Brexit vote and the index of multiple deprivation. So what that tells you is there is something of a relationship there, but it's not very strong. Actually, how deprived somewhere is doesn't tell you very much about its propensity to vote Leave or Remain in the Brexit referendum, which, if you consider, you know, what a divisive and kind of critical determinant of different places' experience that was, it seems quite remarkable that deprivation actually doesn't tell you very much about it. The Community Needs Index, on the other hand, tells you an awful lot about a place's propensity to vote for Brexit. And that, to me, says that while deprivation and material poverty clearly matter hugely, there is something else going on here in the sense of being left behind, being neglected, excluded, annoyed. You know, people in a lot of these places feel, you know, dissatisfied with the way the country is going, and that as lots of different polling evidence has shown, lay behind a propensity to vote to leave the European Union, whatever your views on that particular issue are. So we tend to use the community need index as our kind of starting point as a definition for left behind places. But that said, we made the decision very early on that we will be looking at individual case studies and stories and places rather than being too worried about tight database definitions. So we were interested in what we could learn from different places. These three maps just show you where left behind places measured by the community needs index are located. At the local authority level, that's the one on the left hand side, you can see that they're, you know, as you might expect, often clustered around the industrial centres of the north, but also, and you can see this more when you look at on a finer grain at a ward level, which is the central map there, but also that there are pockets of left behindness in parts of the country which you might not immediately associate with. So Cornwall, for example, has quite significant pockets of left behindness, as does the east of England. So this is something that is related to kind of the much talked about north-south divide, but it is definitely not restricted to it. There's plenty of left behind bits around the peripheries of the southeast and the southwest and east of the country as well. The final map just shows the case studies that we used to go into in depth, and you can read about them in our reports if you want to. These are and actually just hearing Sue earlier, that could absolutely have been one of our case studies. It was a fantastic example of the sort of project that we were looking to learn from and to apply the lessons of. So what did we learn? Well, you'll be pleased to hear I'm not going to go through all 55 policy recommendations that we came up with, but just to kind of summarise the conclusions. What we learned first is that while economics clearly matters, deprivation matters, education, transport, you know, the big ticket stuff of economic development clearly matters, there's also a huge amount that can be done in terms of the finer grained place-based improvements to places that can really make a difference to people's lives. How people feel about their place is often, you know, quite micro. It's not just about you know, century-long patterns of industrialization and deindustrialization. It can really be about how well the local streets are kept clean, how much access to local parks there are. You know, it can be quite micro stuff. And the good news is, of course, these are things that can be changed quite quickly and relatively cost effectively. You know, look at the struggles we take to kind of build a new railway line and the billions that costs. You know, you could sort out the littering and the local park really quite quickly in a lot of places. If we can find the right models for doing so effectively. We also find positively that left behind places often have very significant assets already. They often have, you know, really quite nice built environments. They may often suffer decline, but often the kind of the basic stock is often quite good, and quite nice traditional street patterns that can work very well for communities. Often have some fantastic heritage assets that have been neglected, but these are, you know, rather than seeing these as kind of problems to be dealt with and money pits, these are assets and opportunities for improvement in the future. Often have great public and natural and green spaces, which again can often suffer decline, but they're often there and ready to be improved. And critically, the people themselves. You know, a lot of these places have very, very strong sense of identity and community, and a strong desire to make life better for the people who live in them. So what do they actually need, or rather, what do people want in left behind places? Interestingly, I mean, there's two kind of touchstones here. Firstly, high streets really, really matter. And by high streets, we don't just mean kind of major kind of town centre, kind of city centre retail. We mean the very, very local places, which can be, you know, secondary high streets or just small parades of shops, wherever it is that local neighbourhood kind of comes together and regards as its kind of public centre. And everywhere needs a place like that. To really feel like a place, it needs some sort of centre which people feel a sense of identity and ownership of. And the quality and of the environment there matters massively to everybody. So the first thing that you can do to improve people's experience of where they live is to improve those centres, those high streets. What do they need specifically? Again, local trust polling here showed that the top thing that people in left behind places say they're in need was just places to meet. And it's not necessarily really elaborate high-tech infrastructure. It could be as basic as just a community centre, a pub, a cafe, just somewhere that allows the community to cohere, to come together, to chat to your neighbours, to experience life as a community. So again, these are, you know, these are not easy challenges, but it does help, I think, to make us realise that these are things that we can address. Right? We can improve the quality of places to meet in every neighbourhood in the country. That's not an impossible challenge. Even if some of the kind of the bigger economic structures may take a long time to turn around. So what kind of solutions are we looking at? Well, firstly, kind of starting at the kind of the bigger end, sometimes it is about vision. Sometimes it is about kind of having a big, bold plan for changing things. The example I use here is Stockton-on-Tees. You've got this kind of, I think, fantastic, bold vision to knock down a barrier block shopping centre that currently separates the high street, you can see on the right-hand side of the picture there, from the riverfront. Now that was felt to make sense in the 1960s when it was 70s when it was built, because the river was polluted and it was all about creating a kind of easy place to drive to. Nowadays, I think people recognise actually what we need is high quality public space. What you need is a new park to connect the high street to the river, to make it an attractive destination for people to come and spend time in. So sometimes it does require that big bold vision and the kind of courage to do something quite different. But equally, doing something different can often, it can often just come from the bottom up. It's not just about finding kind of superstar architects to come in and tell you what your place needs. The best people to tell you what your place needs are the people who live and work there already. And there's plenty of examples of this around the country. I've just used one because it's an old one here of Scarborough, where and I used to work in regeneration in the noughties, and I can tell you this was an unusual case at the time. The Regional Development Agency took the bold step of actually listening to local people quite extensively in terms of determining what they wanted to happen in Scarborough. And the main thing they said was, we want to sort out the harbour. Now, I could tell you at the time that would have failed every single one of the economic regeneration viability tests at the time, because there is no way that improving a harbour would qualify for the kind of under the economic rationale of the time. It's not a growth industry. There was no way it was going to generate huge amounts of employment in the fishing fleet or anything like that. That doesn't matter. It was about the place. That's what people in Scarborough felt the place needed. It was what gave the town identity. It was what made it unique, and it was their heritage and their history. So actually, by sorting out the harbour, tackling the dereliction, guess what? It actually created a much more attractive place to be. Lots of micro businesses have been attracted to it, and actually now see Scarborough as an economic success story. It turns out that the economic story of the last 20 years, the places that have been successful, have been those that can attract people with choices, small businesses, often quite mobile knowledge industry workers who actually can work pretty much wherever they want, and often want to work in places that are nice, where it is a nice little cafe overlooking the harbour. So it turns out that by listening to the people of Scarborough and actually investing in the place, turned out to be the smartest economic choice as well as the right thing for that location. So yeah, listen to people properly, engage the community directly in planning regeneration, not just as a kind of consultation exercise. But equally, some of these interventions can be much smaller scale, and this is where I think the real opportunity for community empowerment lies. And again, must pay tribute to the work of Local Trust here, who through their kind of brave and innovative model of just giving £1 million to some of the most deprived and isolated places in the country, have shown what can be done with quite small scale bottom up interventions. So just one example that I could have taken thousands here. This is from the Arches Local in Chatham. Again, a very left behind community, really feeling the kind of neglect of being a relatively deprived place in a relatively high value region. So feeling that kind of juxtaposition of being close to London and the kind of and regeneration of other parts of the Medway, but really feeling left behind by those processes. What did they do? They put some street trees on some rather drab streets, and they painted some murals to start. I mean, this is simple, straightforward stuff, but you hear Stephen Perez from Arches Local talking about this. This was transformatory in their perception of themselves and what they could do for their place. The result is that community has come together so well now that they've now put their own neighbourhood plan together. So often these quite small steps can be the catalyst that brings communities together to lead on to bigger and bolder interventions. This is a housing audience. You won't be surprised to hear that housing is a critical part of this story, both in terms of the problems and the solutions. Many of our case studies really focus on the problem of rundown housing stock in left behind places, often a lot of vacant property, and even worse, often a lot of property being bought up by buy-to-let landlords and let out on a very insecure, low quality basis into the private rented sector, which can cause real physical and social problems in a lot of left behind communities. Solutions are hard to come by here. There's some fantastic work being done by community organisations like Back on the Map in Sunderland or Gyroscope and Hull, who are kind of painstakingly mobilising people to renovate homes and get them back into good use. Ultimately, though, we made some we think that this is an area where huge amounts of public investment is going to be needed if we're going to tackle dereliction, left behindness, and decarbonising the entire housing stock in short order. There's no way around this, but apart from to go for serious area-wide regeneration, doing it piece by piece, house by house, as a lot of fantastic groups are doing, is brilliant. But if we're going to make that step change to a more transformatory level of change, we are going to need some serious area-wide interventions. We think that we should do that on a kind of neighbourhood basis, so from neighbourhood with neighbourhood improvement districts, and actually give community groups the power and the money to actually get right in there and start buying up properties in quite large numbers, because that's when you start to get the efficiencies of scale, when you start to improve whole streets at a time. That's also probably the way that you can start to turn around whole neighbourhoods. You can start to line up housing investment with those interventions to improve the quality of the public realm, the local park, the streets, and that's when you can actually start to drive a kind of virtuous circle of value improvement and start to recoup some of that investment. So huge amounts to be done there, but we do know, there's been some fantastic examples of York Hill from Carbon Homes in the northeast, a great example of kind of housing association led regeneration. We know we can do this, but it is hard work, and we have to get on with it now if we're going to meet anything like our carbon reduction targets. The problem with the PRS, I think, also highlights a further slightly more challenging issue. It's all very well calling for kind of investment in nice things. Sometimes, however, we have to recognise that there are actually some real barriers to doing the right thing and to improving places. Just as in the housing sector, the problem is often exploitative landlords buying up rundown properties to let on housing benefit rates to often quite vulnerable people. The same is true in the commercial and kind of industrial space. A lot of high street property is owned by absentee landowners. They're often quite hard to even find out who they are. Often the trail runs cold pretty quickly in a series of shell companies offshore, who have no interest ultimately in the local community. They're often owning those properties for mysterious reasons. It may be that they're just hoping for long-term value gain. They may just be parking money somewhere safe for a while. Either way, it is not doing that local community much good. And to really turn around high streets, we are sometimes going to have to tackle problem ownership and make sure we can actually get property out of the hands of neglectful absentee owners and into the hands of communities that have the long-term interest of that place and that community at heart. Now that can be a huge range of different things. It can be housing associations, it can be public authorities, it can be community groups themselves. Doesn't really matter as long as they are there for the community benefit, not just because it's some international property play. And far too often we are finding that's the case. This is an example actually from Dumfries, where the community-owned high street is slowly beginning to really transform a very, very kind of declined town centre by steadily taking over bits of the ownership of bits of the high street that have been left empty for a long time. Now that's possible in Scotland because they have a community right to buy. We don't have that in England. One of our key recommendations is that we need stronger powers for communities to acquire property. Just to give you a further example from the other end of the country, from Hastings. This building here is the Observer building in Hastings. It was a print works. You see, it's really quite a fine kind of Art Deco building, right in the centre of the high street. Should be an absolute kind of iconic building for that place. As it is, it's been blighting it with dereliction for 30 years. But in that time, the owners have not been idle. Right? They've had 10 different planning permissions to redevelop that building. Each time that has obviously increased the value of the property, and 13 times it's been sold. So, and all apart from the last owner made money on the deal. So 12 different owners have extracted value from that property in the 30 years it has been blighting that community. Now, this is not just a problem of neglect, it's a problem of active value extraction going on. And if we're really going to turn around left behind places and empower communities to make their neighbourhoods and their town centres better, we're going to have to recognise that sometimes that means prioritising the interests of communities and places over the interests of absentee property owners. So in this case, happily, eventually, after 30 years of struggling, and I think 17 different funding streams, an amazing kind of network of community organisations has managed to come together and acquire the building. But God, it's hard work. Communities need stronger powers to be able to do this stuff, and they need often funding as well. So just to conclude then, what do we need? Firstly, places matter. The quality of the built environment, the physical environment really, really matters. Connectivity matters. Local transport is vital in a lot of places. That means that we can summarize that in kind of three short words: trees, trams, and tricycles. You know, street trees are often just the simplest and best thing you can do to a place. So street trees pretty much everywhere. Localized transport needs to be at a kind of town, neighborhood, suburb to city level. It's not just about massive kind of intercity transport. It's critically about those the more localized transport systems that can connect peripheral left behind places with the thriving economic centers nearby. And changes in technology and regulation mean that actually there's the potential for a huge new boom of localized tram systems in this country, which I would love to see a return to trams in the 21st century. Tricycles isn't to propose tricycles as a particular transport solution. This is just a way of thinking about places. The great Tim Gill has written lots about the power of thinking about urban places through the lens of childhood and play. And the simplest way to imagine, you know, what would improve a place is, what would it take to enable an 8-year-old child to pedal around this on a tricycle happily? And what would it take for this to be a happy place for an 8-year-old to mess around in? If you can do that to a place, you've probably also made it better for older people, for teenagers, for people who want to go sit in a cafe and work, for people who, you know, are taking the kids to school. In short, it works for everyone. If a place is good for an 8-year-old to ride a tricycle, it's probably a healthy, happy, and economically successful place too. This is a useful heuristic for thinking about how to improve our places. Turning around high streets really requires towns and communities to be given the tools and the freedoms to actually intervene and to take ownership of places and to you know, actually get on with providing what they know they need, those places to meet, those centres for communities to come together. And that does mean that they need powers, real powers to intervene. We need a community right to buy, we need a right to regenerate, and they need some of the money. We said here, you know, the powers and half the money. There's often something quite powerful about communities being told that, you know, you have to raise some of the money yourself. It's not just a grant play here. I'm not going to give you 17 different grant streams that you have to apply for. But if you can mobilize, you will get the powers. You will have the ability to intervene and take control of those assets that you need. On the housing side, we need that kind of area-wide, street-by-street investment to bring homes up to standard and give us anything like a hope of meeting the net zero carbon target, which obviously can fit very, very nicely with trying to improve public spaces and streets. And ultimately, that is going to need public funding, but critically different types of public funding. There's quite a lot of money going into this stuff at the moment. It's often in kind of competitive bidding pots that everyone has to apply to multiple times for quite short time periods, very restrictive conditions on them. I'm afraid regeneration requires patient, flexible funding over a long term, and there's just no way around that. Ultimately, we know that the successful places where they've really improved life for their communities are those that can generate a healthy ecosystem of different institutions. There's no one particular model. You know, there's a role for pretty much everybody in this world, but we do know that where the kind of critical anchor institutions like local authorities or major stock-owning housing associations are present, one of their key roles is to foster that wider infrastructure, that wider ecosystem of different institutions that can really empower communities and ultimately get to a point where nowhere is left behind. Thank you.
Thank you, Toby. Excellent session and very, very thought-provoking. So many notes I've captured there from the session. I've seen that we've already had a couple of questions come in that you may want to answer on the live chat. And we can also bring up at the question and answer session. Personally, very pleased that you used a couple of examples there that are very close to my heart. In the last slide, we've got the Peace Hall in Halifax. That's where I grew up. So I grew up with that whole sort of regeneration of the Peace Hall and the difference that made to my family's and friends' lives. And then the Scarborough one, which again, professionally, I was very much involved in the local investment plan. And you're absolutely right. It was bold, but it was very much about listening.
Because I wasn't. I'm very glad you.
Well, I was a commissioner at North Yorkshire County Council then, and I'm still very much involved with a major regeneration master plan that was one of the results of that. Of that investment in the town centre. So it has, you know, improved property values. It has enabled take place. But I think, you know, there was just sort of the resounding message through all of that to me was very much about this whole thinking about, you know, the communities and the people that are left behind, because we have for decades and decades, you know, just talked about deprivation as a whole and you know, and sort of categorized people into that. And this piece of work to me has really broken it down and looked at actually what does being left behind actually mean and result in, which is more important, you know, what's the outcome of that. So that was great. Thank you very much. And as I say, we'll pick up further in the question and answer session. So we'll move on now to our third speaker of the morning, and it's George McGuinness, leads the UK government's £98 million Healthy Ageing Challenge. Ultimately, the research and innovation programme is about enabling people as they age to remain active, productive, independent and socially connected across generations for longer. And I love the bit about across generations. You know, we've got to start remembering older people are a part of a wider community, aren't we? And there. So without further ado, George, I'm going to hand straight over to yourself to take us through your presentation.
Paula, thank you very much. And I'm delighted to be here, a bit like Toby. I'm just about to sort of share a screen so that you should be able to see that. And I'm particularly delighted to be here with the recent publication of the TAPI inquiry report. Harnessing technology to improve lives has long been a passion of mine, and it's really good to see the next stage building on the great work of HAPI. So as you've said, I'm from UK Research and Innovation. And you'll see here that UKRI's mission is about connecting discovery to prosperity and public good, which is a really long-winded sort of way of saying driving better design of products and services through research, innovation and collaboration, the theme for today. I'm going to set some context, say a little bit about research and innovation already underway, and finish with what I think is a note of optimism about the growing range of support available to innovators. So it's pretty obvious the world around us is changing, and it's no longer possible to sit back and ignore it. The changes we face are set to transform all sectors of society, including how we live, work and relate to one another. And I think Toby's talk has really just pulled some of that out. And until recently, climate change and population aging were the top two global megatrends, but they've been joined by the re-emergence, of course, of infectious disease. And we're still in the grip of a pandemic that looks set to enter its third year. And on the way, it's surfaced some new issues and new opportunities, such as questions about how we care for older people. It's accelerated changes on the high streets and in the fabric of our communities. And as Toby has said, the high street is really what matters to a lot of people. It's also challenged assumptions of what can be done virtually, and that we've seen a huge change recently, and with movements like volunteering, surfaced opportunities for much greater intergenerational interactions. So I think the need for innovation is clear, and as is the need to understand the role that technology can play. And these are complex issues. So to seize that opportunity, we are really going to have to harness research and innovation. And it's easy to talk about this in a conference setting, much harder to relate to everyday expectations. So last week, we went out and asked people for some of their views.
You have to adapt to getting older. I think it's something that doesn't maybe come easy to some people. It does concern me that I might not be able to stay in my home. I've got stairs that I've got to go up. I've got a very bad bus service where I live. And again, I haven't got a walk-in shower. So as I get older, I'm going to have to adjust to the fact that I might need to move into a ground floor flat.
We already have a handrail put on our staircase. I think it's very good. And adaptations to stay in your home, I think is vitally important.
You know, however ill we get, we don't want to be in hospital. We want to be able to be looked after at home. I
can't see any reason why I would give it up unless I go see now.
I've been there too long now, and like my father said, the only way I'm going out here is feet first.
my husband has at long last agreed to take the bath out and put in a sitting shower.
I can get in the bath and sit down. Then it takes me an hour and a half to get back out again. Like a stranded wow.
It's been more important now I left work, and since the pandemic realised that you need to get out and about.
Oh, it's really very important. Yeah, I mean,
nobody copes well being on their own.
No. We had my dad live with us last year, and he died. And I have to say that if it wasn't for our community in the church, I don't know how we would have coped.
It's very important for your community to serve you as best as they can, because you become more restricted with movement, getting on the bus.
Sorry, something going wrong.
We're quite close to the university, and the university have a very good bus service, but it doesn't take me to the places. It couldn't bring me across here.
There's not a lot going on for the so-called elderly. There could be more.
So for you, if you were told you would have to leave your community to age, that would be quite good?
I would definitely not want to. No. I don't want to get old anyway. You have to adapt.
Sorry, so that's a timely reminder about how these issues touch real lives. And it feels like we've been here before. Why are so few truly innovative services and products, and the business models behind them, designed to meet the needs of people in later life? And when you look at the figures, this makes no sense. An EU review estimated that what they call the silver economy generated 4.2 trillion euros in GDP and 78 million jobs. And in the UK, people over 50 hold 3 of every 4 pounds in both housing value and financial wealth. And I know Toby's talked about those left behind as well. But there is a market. So perhaps I should reframe the question and ask, why is it that it's so hard for innovative products and services to gain traction in the market? So my work has highlighted a whole range of factors that have held back the innovations in this area. Some that I think are particularly significant are age-related prejudices that ignore older people as a market until they need help. Designers, particularly in technology where many are young, often lack the knowledge of and access to older people to inform the design process. Novel product offerings entering the market but lack a service provider able to integrate them into solutions that address real complex needs in a person-centered way. And this is often the issue with promising technology-based solutions. And a lack of willingness or even ability to pay, either individually or through our health and care system. And dare I add, regulation, so crucial to housing and technology-enabled care markets, and some of the things Toby was just talking about. This all adds up to a lack of attractive and affordable offerings. So can it be different this time? So the Healthy Aging Challenge that I run itself started with the idea that we'd invested a lot in early stage innovation, which had largely failed to scale. So our view was that the solution would really lay in developing services, that is innovations involving technology at relatively high readiness with service solutions at low business readiness. And from this, we developed a vision to guide us. And I want to emphasize what's on the screen. It's about people as they age, changing the point of impact from looking after frail older people to helping people prepare for and make the most of their later lives. An emphasis on services with the ability to scale to deliver what people really want. That's a focus on impact. And the need to think differently about innovating in this space, working with social enterprises as well as for-profit businesses, enhancing that innovation paradigm. And the Centre for Aging Better helped us to define our scope, which is illustrated by the icons, covering 7 themes where there was greatest potential for impact. Now, the themes cover intrinsic factors like staying healthy and active, as well as wider external factors, particularly the built environment and opportunity for employment in later life. In reality, the themes aren't really separate. They represent a holistic view of the elements that come together to provide a fulfilling life. addressing issues such as poverty in later life, social isolation, poor physical health, and cognitive decline. And therein lies why research is so important. It's hard to develop a solution around just one aspect of someone's life. So implementation of what we're doing is built around the idea of catalyzing an innovation pipeline with an emphasis on the far right, taking services to scale. So our Catalyst projects help researchers follow an entrepreneurial path. And we've just started the search to recruit for the next cohort that will start next summer. Our investment partnerships bring private finance to match our government grants to help innovative SMEs develop their innovations and grow. And the Trailblazers, our flagship, are now well on their way on their journey to take innovative services to scale. And I'll say a little bit more about them later. So those three components, Catalyst, investment partnerships, and Trailblazers, were the core of our original plan. But on the way, we've reflected on what we've seen and introduced some additional opportunities. The first is for social ventures. And we'd long wanted to ensure the challenge addressed inequalities head on. And while thinking about how the projects impact people from all walks of life runs right through all our investments, we looked at the market and found a gap in investment where we could help existing social ventures to scale up and achieve greater impact. And we're now in the process of making those awards, and I'm really hoping to be able to announce them early in the new year. So the second new initiative, again, relevant to the topic of today, we call Design for Aging, and we'd always planned to do something specific around design. And this initiative picks up on the experience of our Trailblazers, where actually we had huge interest, but made many fewer awards than expected, a reflection of the fact that this is still an immature and difficult market. And I'm delighted to say the competition closed in the last couple of weeks and actually attracted a huge response. So really looking forward to what will come through that. Now, we also wanted to make sure that we made the most of this opportunity to learn and share insights, the sort of thing that the HousingLIN does. So our community practice, facilitated by the Centre for Ageing Better, is delivering a programme of learning and support with much of what is on offer open to people from outside the funded projects. So we're accepting that we're acting as a catalyst and won't achieve real impact just on our own. So if you're interested, do please join up. I mentioned earlier that the key issue was a lack of attractive and affordable services, and this is reflected in our research programme, where we're focused on enabling innovators to understand the desires and needs of a very diverse demographic. Hence the focus not on the latest technology or bioscience, but rather on understanding the social, behavioural and design aspects that translate into impact. And I want to highlight three examples from the research. The first, Designing Homes for Healthy Cognitive Ageing, is a project led by the University of Stirling that is part of a growing movement to ensure that future developments take account of the needs of our ageing population. The Enliven project, I should call it, led by Exeter University, is helping to open up access to the natural environment for people with cognitive impairment, improving the visitor economy and enhancing quality of life. And actually, the stuff that Toby just talked about, how many places have heritage assets that are undervalued, underused, I think that's a really good example of using assets that exist that people don't think about. And Space, led by Queen's University Belfast, has a much stronger health science component and will inform future urban planning. And you can find out more about all of these on our website and through the links which I'll post in the chat in a minute. So our innovation projects also have a strong focus on housing communities, and I've been pleasantly surprised by the strength of interest in these areas. At the start, my view was that innovation in the built environment would be expensive and take longer to implement than the time we had available. So it was unlikely to feature. How wrong I have been, and happily so. Firstly, the Trailblazers include 3 projects of particular relevance to this conference. Blackwood Homes and Cares, Neighbourhoods for Independent Living in Scotland are covering everything from new housing designs through to digital services for their communities, including such things as giving access to shared electric vehicles. E.ON, the energy company, are extending their energy poverty work to create safer, more aspirational homes for people as they age, working with companies like Invisible Creations and 4Gen Kitchens to design and deliver attractive and affordable solutions that I spoke about earlier. And what's significant about that is E.ON had observed that their energy improvement work for people in fuel poverty often went into houses where people didn't stay there for very long. So together with a broader set of home improvements, they're hoping that actually they will create a home where people can really remain and age for as long as possible. And I suppose with a similar mission, London Rebuilding Society are helping older people remain in their own homes for longer by developing new, I'll probably abuse the word turnkey solutions, but for home improvements and modifications, including novel financing. And it's their design and project management, which is absolutely central to securing innovative finance that actually delivers these to people who can probably least afford it. One of our first wave of Catalyst projects, those early stage research projects, was led by Professor Paul Jones at Northumbria University. And he's been developing designs for flexible living to age in place and working with the South Seaham Garden Village development to put design into practice. So even that early stage stuff can have an impact. And of course, it's not all about big long-term projects. Last year, we funded a number of fast response projects for the COVID pandemic, where a small amount of money enabled rapid innovations to reach the market quickly. So 2 examples, Redgear developed an Internet of Things-based solution to help retirement communities care for people with cognitive impairment during periods of lockdown and self-isolation. And Unforgettable Experiences are now offering virtual, interactive, creative sessions in arts, cultural, and heritage activities with practical support for older people. What's interesting about that is it's part of a growing movement extending the range of virtual services beyond remote consultations and addressing basic needs into helping people lead more fulfilling lives, even if they're isolated at home. So they're just a few of the projects that illustrate the range of work that we've supported over the last couple of years. And looking ahead, I think there's cause for optimism. We've shown just how much technology applied well can do to enhance the lives of older people. And then a landmark report published earlier this year by Professor Andrew Scott, the co-author of The 100-Year Life, on the economic value of targeting aging, has reinformed why this is not just a moral imperative, it actually makes economic sense to governments as well. So the report estimated that a slowdown in aging that increases healthy life expectancy in the USA by 1 year is worth about $38 trillion. So just imagine, even just a fraction of that applied to the UK shows this is a worthwhile objective. Sadly, the reality is that COVID-19 has highlighted the value of arriving in later life in good health. And the past 18 months have been very hard. Older people have been most affected both by the disease and by the measures taken to protect them, resulting in social isolation, inactivity, heightened fear, leading to sort of mental health issues. And the spectre of undiagnosed illness and waiting lists means that the future remains uncertain for them. The need for innovative solutions is clear, and the publication last week of the Social Care White Paper sets out some clear commitments to fund innovation in this space. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how that plays out. More generally, I take heart by the way our community continues to grow, building on a great foundation of research and innovation right across the UK. By my count, there are over 40 centres specialising in aspects of healthy ageing, including the likes of the National Innovation Centre for Ageing in Newcastle, the Digital Health Institute in Strathclyde, the Centre for Ageing and Dementia Research with its links to the Active Building Centre in Swansea, and the Hirani Network in Northern Ireland. This year, that community has expanded to see the launch of the Design Age Institute, the formation of Business for Health, a coalition of businesses looking to make a difference. Even the British Society of Gerontology has just established a special interest group on ageing, business and society, bringing the ageing research and business communities closer together. I'd have to say, That's a really big move for social scientists. And our own healthy aging community practice has grown enormously, with membership going well beyond the projects that we fund. So just to conclude, it seems obvious, but our world is changing, and the last 2 years have demonstrated the urgent need to adapt if we're to make the UK a great place to age. And to make the most of that opportunity, we need to harness research and innovation and collaborate through co-production in the design of products and services and communities actually that meet the aspirations of a diverse community of people as they age across the generations. And the good news is that you're not alone. There is a wealth of expertise and a growing community of support available to entrepreneurs. And finally, if you do want to learn more, as I said, please sign up to our community of practice. And I'll drop all these links in the chat in a minute.
Excellent. Thank you very much, George. Lots and lots of content again there, which, yes, thank you for saying you're going to post these. Obviously, everything will be also available on the HousingLIN website following the session as well, and just some really great content. You know, one of the things that you sort of talked about earlier there, which, you know, I think we do need to see some really exciting results from, is TAPI. You know, we saw the influence that HAPI had on the industry and right across the public and private sector. You know, we need to see that sort of same result coming through from TAPI now, because it's so vital that we really do, you know, embrace those entrepreneurial solutions around technology and how it can support people in place and where they are. And some great sort of striking stats there for me on the actual, you know, the value of the from the point of view of the silver economy. You know, and I think again we use these, but I think we need to start shouting about them more, because, you know, actually you know, ensuring and investing in the ability for people to sort of, you know, continue to live well and age slower, in a sense, brings huge benefits, doesn't it, to the economy. So thank you again, and again, as always, please do drop your questions into the question and answer session, and we'll move on now with our final speaker. Last but not least, I'd like to welcome Michael Chang. Is strategic leader on place, environment, spatial planning, lots of P's in here, and public health. Michael is a chartered town planner. Michael, we won't hold that against you. I'm sure that you're a fantastic town planner who approves everything everybody wants. But you're also an honorary member of the Faculty of Public Health. So I'm going to hand over to you now, Michael, to finish the session and share with us your thoughts.
Thank you, and I did a lot of P's in my presentation. Apologies for that. So good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me. So I'm from the Office for Health Improvement and Disparities, formerly Public Health England, and some of the health protection functions going to UK Health Security Agency. But today I'm primarily here on the Office for the Office for Health Improvement and Disparities side of things. So before I begin, then I think just very briefly about the Health Office for Health Improvement and Disparities, who I call OHID from now on. I think we're currently still getting our priorities together, but I think the key message is business as usual from PhD days in terms of what we're doing around healthy places. But I think you can get from the Sajid Javid's speech in Blackpool a few months ago on the direction of the office in the coming years, if you like. So I'm highlighting 3 quotes from her speech, which you can find on gov.uk. So firstly, is looking at raising the outcomes for the least healthier, if you like. So I think looking at those places being left behind, as Toby was saying, in other areas as well. I think it's basically saying in the second quote about we can't level up economically without leveling up in health. And so therefore, that's one of the key priorities of OHID, is looking at how do we tackle disparities in health and other issues as well. The key thing from my perspective and the work that I do is looking at the third quote, which is really quite interesting. Basically, he's saying he wants OHID to work with whoever it takes, from industry to across the sectors, to make a difference, and that's really where we've been doing the work around this agenda in Public Health England. So in terms of our priorities within the Healthy Places and Communities team, just to say that vision is from the Healthy Places team from back in PHE days, so it may change when we move forward within the office with the new team here. But for now, in short, it's about healthy places to grow up and grow old in. So hopefully that's a good context for my presentation. Unlike the other speakers, I think who have focused on the positive aspects of some of these issues, I think my key focus looking at blockages in the system and whether things aren't quite working, how can we help unblock the system, especially the planning system. So I do have a few kind of negative slides if we go into more positive slides, but I think it's useful to set out where we are working from to begin with. But I think looking at mapping, and I think Toby quite eloquently highlighted some of the issues around left behind spaces and places. I think we had to start addressing the geography of health disparities or disparities in general. And that's even more important now given the levelling up agenda, as many of you know anyway. A forthcoming white paper, as you know from news, has been delayed till February or early next year, and a forthcoming bill, which will be the levelling up bill, including the planning bill in the new year, and the adult social care white paper, which others have said as well. But I think looking at the population, we are aging across the country, but we are aging in different places. And I think we have to recognise that for some solutions and interventions, it may not be needed everywhere, it may not work everywhere, but we need to focus on where the population will be aging and we can make a difference. But how is the planning system dealing with this issue? Well, if you look at a recent research, back in 2018 by Litchfield, a consultancy, they look at planning policies across the country by councils and how they're tackling the aging population housing needs. And you can clearly see that not many of them are dealing with these issues as well as they should be in policy terms. So that's something that we can try and address as a group, not just from the OHID perspective. In terms of this planning system, and I think there are some disparities built into the planning system, which we have to try and address and for me to help unblock in the next few months or coming years anyway. Looking at the links between the planning policies, which shape communities for the next 10, 15, 20 years, and how they're linked to public health needs and priorities of the local authorities. The majority actually don't make the connection, at least in policy terms. And so therefore you can ask yourself, well, if councils aren't planning for the health needs of their community, which are identified by Director of Public Health, then who are they planning for and what they're planning to? And that's one key question that we try and address as well going forward. And we know housing design quality has been very poor, and that's been consistently very poor for a number of years, from CAPE days to recent Place Alliance research. And again, there's regional disparities around housing quality, primarily better in London, but there's still quite few mediocre developments in London, but primarily other parts of the country have poorer housing quality. So you're going to have to ask yourself, how do we level up by improving housing quality across the country? And the planning white paper is trying to address that through the use of design codes and other mechanisms as well. And one finally going to say, the size of the prize of the planning system, obviously, the £7 billion doesn't all go towards housing and other kind of health promoting infrastructure, but the majority can be health promoting towards active design, natural environment, public realm improvements, and all those issues. But again, there are disparities built into that system where the majority of the money goes into the London, the southeast, and less up in the north. And you can say, well, that's because of land values, and quite rightly so, because land values are kind of lower in the north, and therefore they secure less money in absolute terms. But then I think the general principle is we want to try and make sure that other countries, other parts of the country, secure the right amount of money to invest in health promoting infrastructure. So there are a few issues about how these are playing out on the ground, and I think part of my work is looking at planning decisions, planning policies, and where decisions are kind of not very health promoting, if you like. And I'm highlighting two examples here very, very briefly, and I'm trying to anonymize them so you don't know where they are. The key question for this particular case is, what contributing role can housing in general play in supporting actions to address the housing needs of those most in need? That's a lot of ends there. Not just the older people population, but those vulnerable emergency housing as well. And this particular case in a part of the country is looking at the change of use conversions, which is a particular mechanism in the planning system where you don't go through the full planning permission process. You get very light touch application, considering only a very limited number of issues like flooding, transport, contamination only. And when this particular case was granted back in 2016, you don't have to consider things like access to daylight, natural daylight. But anyway, this one was approved back in 2016, and it's now being used by emergency temporary accommodation. Primarily when when the application was going through back in 2016, 2015, it wasn't highlighted as a temporary emergency accommodation. It was highlighted as a private sector accommodation. So therefore, it's being used now for quite vulnerable people, and that went through primarily initially through the planning system. So how can we address that through my work in OHID? And the other one's looking at the needs for supported and care housing, which is obviously very timely and relevant for HousingLIN. So how can local actions, primarily by planners and other architects, etc., better support these schemes going through the system to meet an identified local need? So this particular case was for 100 home units out in Nottinghamshire, but I'm not telling you the district council, on a part of a former golf course. It already has outline planning consent granted on appeal, which meant the local authority initially declined planning permission for one on appeal. But in this particular case, the planning inspector found that actually the impact of the scheme would outweigh the benefits of this particular care unit. So it was dismissed in terms of not getting planning permission. So potentially a very needed scheme for the local area, but declined planning permission at the end because of impact of the neighboring community rather than the benefits of within their care community. So how can we make sure that these schemes can be brought forward in a really sustainable way, but not decline planning permission towards the end of the whole process? So I think the P's come back, back to my P's, 4 P's. They're looking at how do we plan for the place, the neighborhood, whatever spatial scale there may be, the town center, or larger regional, sub-regional scale. The people you're planning for and the public health outcomes you are really trying to achieve from the interventions you're trying to promote. And that's obviously very timely from the 4 publications that are highlighted there, from the recent one from the LSC, from the main department commission to look at the role of community housing, community-led housing and social cohesion and isolation issues. Living Beauty, the commission's report looking at design quality, the disease of disparity, and the CMO, the Chief Medical Officer's recent reports around health and coastal communities. Again, those are the very left behind places. So how do we address all of this through the planning system and the place shaping process the planning system enables? So that's where the Office for Health Improvements and Disparities come in, and a Healthy Places team come in. And I'm primarily here for the Healthy Places team rather than the whole organization. But we do have a whole program looking at some of these issues, and we do work quite closely with our colleagues looking at homelessness, air quality, indoor air quality, and other issues as well. But we have 5 program areas looking at planning, housing, transportation, and natural environment. And so we're obviously trying to see how we can make a difference within our individual program areas by working with other agencies, stakeholders, researchers, industry, etc. So please, please do keep an eye on what we do in the next few months as we try and finalize our priorities for the next year or 2. So these 4 Ps are being translated on the ground. And I think, even though I highlighted some negative, quite poor examples earlier on, there are good things being done. And Jeremy highlighted earlier on the Healthy New Towns program, which the NHS England funded and managed back in 2016-19. And it was a multi-million-pound program. So it was quite a high-profile program from the 5-year forward strategy. But they funded 10 demonstrator sites across the country, from Darlington in the northeast to Cranbrook in the southwest. The kind of key thing is, now I can't share any learning with you because there was no evaluation done on the whole program. And so that's a key thing that I can't really quite share with you. But I know anecdotally from speaking to those areas, or some of the areas that have found the partnership, the funding, and the relationships with planners and other partners locally to be really beneficial. But apart from that, I can't tell you the kind of formal valuation from that. And I think that's one key thing that I'm really quite happy to see the UKRI doing, is funding evaluation research as part of the kind of investment program of actual interventions. So it's all joined up rather than you funding interventions and then leaving the evaluation till last, and actually that doesn't get funded because it just didn't go through the funding process. But they are quite key things that we try to put forward in the Health in New Towns program, including looking at the built environment, social cohesion, food access, and all those issues which the sites are taking forward individually, and then making good progress. But nationally, we haven't learned from the lessons from that, which is a shame, really. Finally, to kind of finish off my presentation, few key things for me to highlight from the work that we're doing now that you would be interested in thinking about. So there are three key things, really. The first thing is looking at how do we provide greater clarity about what physical and mental health and well-being means. I think in some of the key things that we're looking at, it's very hard to put a finger on exactly what we mean, and therefore it's not being funded or properly funded and taken into account in the decisions that we make around places. How do we improve policies that can have positive health net gain? So that's a concept that we can try and promote in the next few years. How do we promote a health net gain? Very similar to the biodiversity net gain concept that the government is pushing now as well. How do we support local systems to develop policies and decisions that helps people the most? So how do we have health impact assessments? How do we use the local design code requirements right now to help those people? And then finally, number 6 is how do we mature and sustain these relationships that we have built up over the years across industry, stakeholders and different sectors? Because obviously, at the end of the day, the Office for Health Improvement, we don't have any direct investment on the ground. We work through others. And so therefore, how do we make a difference through others? And so that's where I finished my presentation. If you want any more information, please sign up to our Knowledge Hub or email the Health Places email, and we can help you and see how we can work together going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Michael. Very, very, very insightful again presentation there, which provokes a lot of thought. And I thank you for sort of setting off the presentation and finalising the presentations today with, yes, some of the challenges, because it's great for us to showcase, you know, some of the great projects that are out there and some of the success stories and some of the real outcomes that we can have. But we all live day to day across the sector in an environment where there are challenges that ultimately, you know, we are not keeping up delivery in relation to solutions of both products and services in line with demand. The demographic is way ahead of where we are as a supply chain. And I think, you know, yes, there are some positive, you know, tones coming out of the whole levelling up agenda, but how can we now turn that into actually tangible results? I think is sort of some of the key sort of provoking questions that you then leave us with at the end. You know, that ultimately the innovation is there, some of the solutions, some of the examples, etc., is there, but how do we, in a sense, mature those relationships? Because that brings us back to what's really important here is around the collaboration, because not one of us in the sector or one organisation or one government body is going to be able to do this on their own. It is going to need those relationships to build across networks like the HousingLIN and other networks, and then capture this and bring this forward. So I'd like to obviously move forward now. That completes the presentations for this session. I'd like to invite Matt Leach, CEO of the Health Trust, to join in on the panel debate. So please do include Matt if there's any questions that you have, and I'm sure as Toby said, between Toby and Matt, they will be able to, I'm sure, be able to answer any questions that you have there. So I'm going to quickly go over and just see where we are within here. And look, so forgive me if any of these, so I'm reading as I'm speaking. So first of all, there was an early question for yourself, Toby, which was around the harbour. So it was around that regeneration. Does this come under value added?
Short answer, it depends. Yes, it should, obviously, and but I think what the question meant was to highlight that there are flaws in the way that we do basic appraisals, right? And the kind of the classic Treasury Green Book, if you read it, it includes all sorts of mention of kind of social value, environmental value, and it sounds great, but actually when you boil down the methodology, it's really just about having increased property values. That's really what they measure. And that's ultimately what determines whether investment flows into most projects from the public side, and money from the private side too. So yeah, I think there is a fundamental problem in the way that we appraise for value. What do we really mean by value, and how do we really reflect that in the decisions we make? And it's not just about are we taking a holistic enough view of value in terms of factoring in the benefits to communities of improved health and well-being. It's even more just simplistic than that. It's like, are we even capturing within the kind of narrower economic frame of financial value actually the long-term benefits from improving dynamism in a local economy, or improving people's mobility? Because too often our appraisal frameworks are just a bit too narrow.
Thank you. Yeah, anybody else would like to add anything onto that from the pot of value part? Because ultimately, any development, but a development as such as the harbour, as you say, that wasn't, in a sense, that sat typically with your assessment of what would constitute regeneration. There was some real value there that I know from the local authority's point of view, yes, was very much captured around the outcomes of that, because it led then to further projects, further investment on the back of what the harbour development constituted. And it's you're right, it's the terminology. But Matt, do you have anything that you'd want to add? Sorry, George.
Well, after Matt, happy.
No, that's fine.
Really, well, I think the harbour thing is really interesting about the asymmetry of evidence. So what is the reason to believe the harbour development would come off? And I think Toby pointed out some really good community engagement providing that, but also there's much more evidence of how big developments actually generate value than there is about creating an environment where small businesses feel like they can migrate in and create a local community. And I think one of the great things about the Scarborough thing is it starts to provide that, but we do need to be challenging and calling out where there are good examples, how well documented are there, and how can people use those to support their own ideas and developments going forward.
Yeah, absolutely right. Because I think, as you say, it is about how do we capture it when it doesn't fall within just a set category. Sorry, Matt, and apologies, George, I didn't see your hand up. I had the box in the wrong place on the screen. Matt, would you like to add anything?
Well, I think probably not on the question of the harbour development, but I think more generally, I think what was interesting about a set of really fascinating contributions was the extent to which everybody actually was coming towards the same place. And I think particularly that issue of how you don't just build homes, but you build communities, and you look at what you're doing in that context. So Sue, talking about getting people into the buildings, everything is about connection for human beings. That's what's fundamentally important. If you look at research from the American Enterprise Institute in the States, they looked at big survey data which showed that satisfaction with life in places was directly linked to there being buildings or institutions where people could meet up, come together, where people knew their names. It wasn't down to type of housing. It wasn't necessarily down to income. It was about the social infrastructure that comes with all of that. And I think Toby very much nailed that in terms of his talking about left behind areas and the places with low levels of civic activity and a lack of places to meet. You can see when you map the data, and I posted in the chat a link to some of that data, that in those places loneliness and isolation is higher, significant health outcomes are much lower, and all of that places higher costs and increases the challenges to statutory agencies, to providers, to meet needs, particularly with ageing populations. And George highlighted that in his video when you talk about community, about social interactions. And we see that when we go out and we survey people, particularly living in those left behind areas, often the housing estates on the edge of post-industrial areas, sometimes the ones that don't benefit from the great development that Toby thought about, and the ones that are shied away from by providers that might be looking for a financial return rather than necessarily targeting those areas with the biggest social need. Because you can see when you survey those areas that what people want, and actually is irrespective of age, is stuff to do and places to meet. And I think you can see, I was in a community centre in one of those areas last week, and what you could see, it only opened a couple of weeks ago. It had been closed since COVID, but what immediately sprung up in it were walking groups, coffee mornings, opportunities for older people to come together, some of them actually coming from residential care facilities, but wanting to engage with a wider community in their area. And Michael talked about that again in relation to the health agenda. And I think there is this question of how we more effectively build all of that into the way we plan place, and how we build both institutions in the sense of buildings and organizations to run them when we're designing new places. And in the end, it's not about older people really, it's about communities as a whole, because, and you can see that, if you look back to the work Jeremy and James Barrington and others did on Richard Best on the early happy stuff, actually what's better for older people when it comes to design is actually better for everyone. There's not really a sense of a conflict of priorities or stuff being pulled apart. It's about starting to move towards a better idea of what communities can be, led by community priorities, fundamentally focused on building institutions, places to come together and places to interact. And if we get that right, then a lot of the other answers, technological or building design wise, in some ways become almost less important. It's about enabling the stuff that allows for our fundamental humanity, and that's about a need to connect.
Absolutely, it's that need to connect. And I think just one point there that I'd like to follow on from your sort of designing for all the people. I loved the point that Toby made around what would it be like for an 8-year-old. That to me is ingenious. That's great, because we do often think about, we want inclusive communities, and I've done it in the past. You've talked about stepless entry, is just as good for a mum with a pram as it is with somebody who's now reliant on a walking frame. But actually stripping it back the other way, and instead of just thinking just about aging, is actually to engage that younger generation by thinking about, would the 8-year-old be happy here? And that sort of links into a question that was posted by Joss, which is public realm accessibility is often the Achilles heel of many wonderfully innovative projects. So what do you feel can be done to move away from a car-first urban design to champion and then deliver access for all? Michael, do you want to jump in first, and then maybe George, you've got something to add here?
Yeah, thank you. It's a really good point. I mean, there's definitely a lot more we can do to change the way that places are designed and the public realm is given back to pedestrians and people using the spaces rather than private vehicles. Again, that's more in the realm of Department for Transport, and I know they are revising the manual for streets version 3, I think. So therefore, I think you can see how they can do more about this, and we are trying to fit into it to make sure that public health is quite central to what they're doing. And similarly, for local authorities bringing forward local design codes as a requirement from the National Planning Policy Framework back in July, we can try and influence that locally and make sure that they all design for reduced car dependency of new developments and existing places. I think the key kind of word that others are saying, I think the key word is about life course and the lifetime neighborhoods concept, which again, looking at the adult social care white paper is becoming, back into fashion. I think at one point it wasn't really useful to use the term lifetime neighborhoods, lifetime homes, but I think now it's beginning to be that kind of thing again. I think you're right, we need to involve more younger people. I think the key issue is we tend to think about old people and very young people and no one in between. I think the Australians have announced that they'll be involving younger people in the policy panel. I'm not sure exactly how that's playing out, but I think involving people, not just the 8-year-olds, but the teenagers as well, because in many cases, they're the ones who have no place to go to, and therefore some of their behaviors are causing concern for residents, which shouldn't be the case. We should provide spaces for everyone, from the very young to teenagers to other people as well. And very kind of briefly, looking at disparities, one of the comments in the chat is looking at life expectancy, and I think that seems to be the key indicator that we are using in public health around promoting healthy places, and we have seen that's leveling off a bit, and obviously that's different across the country, but also different across individual districts. I think in Plymouth, if you go from the west to the east, you lose years in life expectancy, and you see this all across the country, and the built environment has a role to play in that as well. I'm not saying it's the contributing factor to leveling off of the life expectancy across the country, but if we are approving and building poorer places, there's very strong evidence that people living in those poorer areas will have poorer health outcomes than those living in better quality places. So anyway, a lot of issues there to think about.
Thank you. Toby, I know you've got something to add to this, and I know you're typing something in frantically there, trying to answer some of the question as well and save some time maybe, but do you want to just add to that?
Very quick, yeah, I mean, there's loads that could be done here, but just to give you two little examples of where just well-meaning rules prevent good design and human-centered design because they favour car-based design. First is secured by design. Yeah, sensible attempts in the 90s to try and reduce crime meant that the police inspired with planning policies require new car parking spaces to be overlooked by windows. That seems fun. That basically bans you from putting cars at the end of the street or around the back of houses. So they have to be parked out the front of houses, often kind of in between the front door and the street. Now that massively disrupts the ability of a kind of house to engage properly with the street and kind of reduces the sense of a kind of friendly community on your street. Second one is the bin lorry effect. We require new developments to enable sufficiently big spaces for huge bin lorries to be able to reverse and turn easily, rather than which means you end up with overly large kind of roads in quite kind of otherwise low density suburban neighborhoods, dominated by kind of vast displays of tarmac, rather than designing our bin lorries around the needs of sensible towns, right? And we've just got our priorities the wrong way around. We're designing our places to suit our vehicles rather than the other way around.
That's great, thank you. There's just been something added on here, George, which should be interesting from the, whether we see this as a sort of a real opportunity. Should we as a government invest in a gaming app for 8-year-olds to score a new place?
Gosh, well, I think firstly, I'd leave that to the experts in public engagement, because I think there are all sorts of really innovative approaches to getting people in and looking at their communities, adding comments. So whether a gaming app is the right thing, what's clear from what I was saying earlier, if it's to be intergenerational, whatever that does has to be integrated into the other things that collect. So it certainly has potential, but I would want someone to sort of really work out how that came together.
Okay, thank you. Sue, I just want to bring you in here. So there's a question on here. It's anonymous in the actual chat rather than in the questions and answers, but there's something around different levels of social capital between areas and the need to target our resources and investment more. This also fits with the inverse care law that in the NHS, the areas with the greatest health need are the places that struggle for workforce the most. As an operator and as somebody that has really faced the challenges throughout COVID in relation to securing a workforce, do you sort of resonate with that? And obviously, the Harrogate borough has very different economic areas across its borough. It is quite diverse, isn't it?
Harrogate is probably one of the most diverse communities, and I have worked in the sector now for nearly 30 years, and I have never known us struggle for stuff the way that we're struggling, and I'm not sure what the answer is. A lot of it is obviously history from the government changing, all the different things that have happened over the years, whether it be the changes in the immigration, bringing people into the country when they used to come in and do these adaptation courses. That made a huge difference. Then of course with Brexit and then COVID, there is just not the workforce, and I don't think it matters where we are in the country now. Everybody's struggling the same. And Harrogate has its own challenges because of the way the town is. And what's happening is that we've all got the same jobs and everybody's applying for the same ones and take it. And there's almost a bit of a price war going on now with you know, what do we pay the staff, or let's give them a £200 bonus. So it's a real challenge, but I think it's a challenge across all the sectors, whether it's, you know, the NHS have got their own challenges, and it's a huge concern. And as I say, I've never worked in a situation where we're turning care away because we can't stuff it. So yeah.
George, before I move on to a question that's come into the chat for yourself, have you got anything to add to that question? You know, is there a sort of a real issue here around, you know, where there's the greatest health need is where we're struggling with had the biggest struggle from workforce? So
I mean, I think that's in part a resource allocation question, but it's also something that I've seen. I did some work before at the UKRI in East Anglia, where while they had an aging population, they were having a declining carer workforce, and care homes were actually shutting. And part of the solution was not to view each of those areas individually, but to try and join up the big and the small hospitals, the hospitals and the care community. So there was better sort of professional support and development. But you know, that's one area and one approach to that. But I think I think you highlight a real issue. Most of I'm careful what I say, but I think a lot of failing hospitals fail because of chronic workforce issues. So they're chronically dependent on locum staff who have no commitment to do the wider duties within that hospital. They come and do that, you know, a valuable job, but actually an over dependence of that actually is very corrosive on the organisation, the skills within it.
Yeah, and there's something here for me, which again is something I've been heard saying on many occasions, and I won't apologise for repeating myself, but there's something here to me that you end up with the greatest health need in communities that are left to age, you know, because we're not investing in that community and into what are the opportunities, you know, for people to be inspired to, you know, where necessary, move into homes that are appropriate because the homes they're living in are not appropriate. We're freeing up then family homes for young families to move in and to thrive. So ultimately, by default, we end up with communities that are very much aging. And, you know, often then we see a huge deterioration in health because there isn't that interaction, and because there isn't then local younger people living. So you've got a very aging populace rather than a mixed populace. You inevitably have issues with the workforce. So I think there's some real sort of practical side of this challenge, just as much as there is around the whole sort of policy and the lack of investment in health and social care that, you know, we are all, you know, acutely aware of.
Well, can I just come back to you on two things? One is, we've got a couple of projects running which are about one called the Tribe Project, which is about identifying what they call care dark spots, where there's need without supply, but working with partners, including Skills for Care and things, to identify people who would like to enter the caring profession, to upskill them, to equip them as micro businesses, and create local care economies. And in fact, I heard something similar on the radio in Wales with Community Catalyst doing just that. So there is good work, and we are supporting that. There's also work coming through the white paper and elsewhere, but we're supporting another company that's bringing in models from elsewhere. So looking at changing the way that care is delivered to make it a more attractive profession for people to actually pursue, more valuable and worthwhile. And I think by doing that, often people aren't there just for the money. What really puts them off is actually the conditions of the work and the way that they're treated as workers. And if we can address that through things like the sort of the Buurtzorg model imported from the Netherlands, etc., I think there is real potential to turn this around.
There is. Well, now, unfortunately, we are running out of time. I need to give Jeremy time to just do a final thanks to everybody. So summing up for me, I haven't got round to the chat, and you may want to answer it, George, that's in there, which was a reference to the 4-gen kitchens, because Kevin didn't capture that fully. So it would be great if you could answer that in there. I know you'd like to answer it live, but we have run out of time, unfortunately. So thank you to everybody for joining us today. Thank you very much to the 4 speakers and to Matt for joining us for the question and answers. I hope everybody's found it informative. I hope you found it thought-provoking, and it's going to set the scene now for the rest of the day and in fact the rest of the festival. So thank you again to everybody, and over to you, Jeremy.
Paula, and a real big thanks to you for chairing today and setting the scene so well for this week, and the team at Lovell Later Living behind the scenes as well for all your support. As you say, we've got a real great week ahead of you and ahead of us, and many of the things that we've touched on this morning will be deeply diving in a number of sessions. In fact, we have one at 1 o'clock today, which will look a bit more in detail about the sort of partnership working that Paula referred to, and some of the work with Faithful and Gould and others about taking that forward. So please do join us again at 1 if you haven't already signed up. But again, on behalf of the HousingLIN, can I also express our thanks to all the speakers and the panelists this morning. It's been a real great session, lots of learning, and I'm looking forward to capturing that, and we'll be sharing that to everybody, including the presentations, the chat and the Q&As in a subsequent email to everybody who signed up for this session. So on behalf of the HousingLIN and the team behind our scenes as well, thanks again, and I look forward to seeing you at the next session, if not at 1, at a future one.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.